Hey guys, Matt here. It's been a while, so I thought we'd do another one of these clips episodes where I talk about some of the big things happening this week and some things that have kind of caught my eye. And I want to start with probably arguably the biggest story of the week, Donald Trump's trial. The hush money New York trial began this week. And let's go to our friend Jesse Waters from Fox News, who's feeling really sorry for Donald Trump, who's very put upon because of the difficulties of having to endure this trial.
Former president of the United States, if he leaves court to go to the restroom, jail. If he calls the prosecutor corrupt, jail. If Trump moves or says anything, they scream jail.
Okay, I don't know anything about him going to jail. And the only thing that comes to mind here is that Trump has violated the gag order multiple times. He has attacked witnesses on social media. He has retweeted people like Jesse Waters or retruthed people like Jesse Waters who have been critical of jurors. And so Trump has violated the gag order. If you or I did it, we probably would go to jail, but that's not happening to Trump, so I'm a little confused.
Did Khalid Sheikh Mohammed get slapped with a gag order? Trump's not even allowed to complain about the thermostat. It's a meat locker.
It's a meat locker, he says. Yeah, it's cold in there for everybody, though, right? Is it just Trump, or is maybe the judge who has to work there probably a lot also cold? How about the jurors? You think they're cold? It's not just Donald Trump. This is an old building, and the judge said, hey, if I put the thermometer up 1 degree, it's going to feel 30 degrees hotter in here. Trust me, I work here. So maybe Trump could wear a cardigan or a sweater or a jacket. But he's not the only person in there. And by the way, there are a lot of people around the country who work actually tough jobs. Maybe they don't control the temperature in their offices all the time. But of course, this is Trump.
Locker in there. He gets mocked for just closing his eyes.
Right. Because he allegedly falls to sleep and possibly farts during court. But I guess no one is supposed to notice an old guy falling asleep, allegedly, or resting his eyes. That's perfectly normal.
Donald Trump, been on the move his whole life. Golf, rallies, movement, action, sunlight, fresh air, freedom. This isn't.
Yeah. Again, there are a lot of people who work jobs that are tough. Every day they go someplace uncomfortable that they don't want to be. They don't get to hang out at Doral Golf Course or Mar-a-Lago or Bedminster all the time. They're not really free. And what about people actually in the criminal justice system who get caught up in it? Whether they're guilty or not, they are subject to having to go through trials and tribulations. But I guess Donald Trump should be exempt from all that, according to Jesse Waters.
Isn't lawfare, it's torture.
Torture.
Making a 77-year-old man sit inside a dingy room for 8 hours straight.
Oh, a 77-year-old man. If Donald Trump is too old to sit in a room for a few weeks, then I'm not sure he can be president.
Straight, 4 days a week. And if he moves or talks, jail. How do you campaign for president if you can't move or talk?
I should be in Georgia now. I should be in Florida now. I should be in a lot of different places right now campaigning. And
I feel really sorry for him. I'm going to have to take my tears off air. It's hard for me to feel sorry for Donald Trump. One interesting thing, of course, is that political people were wondering if the trial would help or hurt Donald Trump. So you might remember back during the Republican primary phase, whenever Trump would be indicted or if Mar-a-Lago was raided because, I don't know, Trump wouldn't give back classified documents, Trump went up in the polls with Republicans. So then there was speculation, well, maybe that's just Republicans. When we get into the general election, maybe that'll be different. But it turns out, for a while at least, the polls, despite all the problems Trump continued to have, he was leading in many polls against Joe Biden. And then there was thought, well, maybe once the trials actually began, or maybe if there's a guilty verdict, but it was unknown. And the only thing we could look at is in the past, every time Trump did something crazy. He went up in the polls. It redounded to his benefit. We were wondering what would happen. Well, it's too early to say, of course, but according to CNN's Harry Enton, Trump so far is not benefiting. Let's watch this tape.
What are you seeing in polling since the Republican primary ended and the focus has shifted into the courtroom?
Yeah, I think there's this idea that the legal troubles that Trump is facing have somehow helped him, but that's not something that I've necessarily seen in the recent data. So this is Biden versus Trump margin nationally. Look, in January and February, you had a pretty clear Trump lead, right? +5, +4, +5, and you had the Marist poll that had Biden up by 1, but within the margin of error. A Trump lead. Look at what's happened in April, though. All of these polls, all of them have shifted to be more friendly to Biden. +4, +3, +1, but it was +4 Trump back in January and February, and +5 to now +2. So something is cooking, Kate. Something is cooking in the polls, and whatever is cooking seems to be helping Joe Biden. And one of the things that might be cooking is the fact that the attention has turned from the Republican primary now to Trump's legal problems, because that's really been the main thing that's been in the news.
Something is cooking. It sounds nefarious when it comes from Harry Enton. Is there any sign, though, that you're seeing of what it has been suggested, Donald Trump has said it, that this attention, his legal troubles are helping him?
Yeah, so let's take a look here. This is the Biden versus Trump margin by attention paid to Trump's legal cases. This is from a recent New York Times Siena College poll. If you're putting some attention, some or a lot of attention, if you're looking at the Trump trials, look at this. Biden leads among these voters by 8 points. If you're paying little to no attention, Trump leads among these voters by 18 points. So the more people are focusing in on the Trump cases, they're actually more likely to vote for Joe Biden than for Donald Trump. The less attention that you're paying, the more likely you are to vote for Donald Trump.
All right. So now there is, interestingly, there's a group out there called Republican Voters Against Trump, RVAT, that is trying to push this message that Donald Trump, that if you or I did the things that Donald Trump did, if we were accused of the things Donald Trump has been accused of, we couldn't even get a menial job. And they put together this pretty, I think, compelling video that it looks like it's undercover, and there's someone who's going into a mall, trying to get hired at a mall, but disclosing the same kind of rap sheet that Donald Trump has accrued. It probably, if you're listening to this, it probably won't be quite as compelling as if you're watching it. But I think you will get the fact that this is a pretty clever idea that, again, I think illustrates the disparity. The fact that Donald Trump gets away with things that no other person, no average Joe, no Joe Six-Pack could ever get away with.
I was wondering if you guys are hiring right now. I was thinking about applying for a job. I was thinking about applying for a job here. I'm currently facing 88 felonies. For detention of classified information. Do you all take people that have been found liable for sexual assault, trying to overturn the 2020 election, falsifying business records? I was wondering if that was going to be a problem.
You're working with diamonds and jewelry.
They're gonna do a background check.
Yeah.
So that's the only.
So probably not.
Yeah.
So do you guys hire people that have been found liable for sexual assault, or?
We run a phone background. It won't go through. No, we don't.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Donald Trump has been charged with 88 felonies and found liable for sexual assault. If Trump is too big of a liability to get a job at your local mall, he is too big of a liability to be president of the United States. Republican Accountability PAC is responsible for the content of this advertising.
All right. I think that's pretty good, but you let me know what you think in the comments. All right. I want to shift gears here and talk a little bit about my old boss, Tucker Carlson, who has always making waves. Most recently, he had on a Palestinian Christian priest, I believe, and he made waves because the implication of the conversation is that Israel kills and persecutes Christians.
If you wake up in the morning and decide that your Christian faith requires you to support a foreign government blowing up churches and killing Christians, I think you've lost the thread.
Okay, so that that was it's a 45-minute long video, but that line from Tucker got a lot of criticism from a lot of different people. Interestingly, one thing that happened is that this video surfaced of a young Tucker Carlson on C-SPAN talking, and he's criticizing Pat Buchanan. And I think you'll see a couple of things that are interesting and telling. Like, one is he's criticizing Buchanan for being anti-Semitic. The other is he's criticizing Buchanan for kind of, at least I think it's in this video, but if not, during that same interview, he criticizes Buchanan for kind of being a contrarian who casts himself as the only honest man left in Washington, D.C., while there's this, cabal, deep state cabal who are pulling the strings. Anyway, a lot of people on Twitter found this worth sharing. If you haven't seen it, it's worth your time.
I mean, this is part of the sad thing about Pat Buchanan, as far as I'm concerned. And just to restate, I mean, Pat does raise issues that I think are important. I mean, I think that, the sovereignty of the American military, et cetera, I mean, these are not just crank issues. But unfortunately, Pat Buchanan raises them in a way that I think is discredited. And when attacked, he can always fall back on the line, well, the tiny cabal that controls American politics doesn't like me because I speak truth to power. This is actually, incidentally, almost verbatim what he said the other day, that I have.
Okay, so that part reminds me a little bit of Tucker, a lot of Tucker now. Everybody else is falling for the, I don't know, big whatever, some conspiracy. But he's the one who's privy to this insight, which of course is a very contrarian, weird viewpoint compared to everybody else.
That I offend the plutocracy, that I'm a wanted man by the inside the Beltway people, and in every sense cast himself as a victim who is sort of a Karen Silkwood of politics.
Again, that's sort of what Tucker's doing these days.
Politics, someone who's so truthful that he's being hunted down by the conspiracy that runs Washington. I mean, it's all
again. I repeat myself.
Washington. I mean, it's all a bit much. Maybe Pat Buchanan just says things that are kind of kooky, and that's why he's being criticized. It's perfect.
Maybe he just says things that are kooky.
Perfectly valid to question America's relationship with Israel. Israel has a lobby. It's perfectly fair, as far as I'm concerned, to beat up on Israel's lobby. But I don't think that's the reason that Buchanan is being labeled an anti-Semite. It's this kind of, as I've said, this relentless bringing up topics related to Judaism. I mean, famously, Pat, always beats up on Goldman Sachs, but never Morgan Stanley. I mean, it's really hard to. There is no point at which Pat Buchanan has held a press conference and said, I really don't like the Jews. I think they're a sinister force in America. But I think, and it took me years to come to this position. I mean, I'm not throwing the term anti-Semite around. But you reach a point when you say, well, gee, here's a guy who has gone out of his way to defend Demjanjuk and other accused Nazi war criminals, who's constantly attacked Israel, who's attacked American Jews for supporting Israel unduly, who's implied that American Jews push America into wars in which non-Jews die. There really is, and again, I'm not hysterical on this subject, but I do believe that there is a pattern with Pat Buchanan of needling the Jews. Is that anti-Semitic? Yeah. I mean, after a while, you conclude it is, in some sense, anti-Semitic. I mean, Pat Buchanan obviously has a lot of personal and affectionate relationships with people who are Jewish. So on a personal level, perhaps he's not. But on a different, maybe thematic level, I think he probably is. I think that people should be allowed to have differing views on immigration. I think people should be allowed to point out the fact that there is an Israeli lobby, and yes, it's powerful, and debate the merits of that, I guess. I don't think there's, strictly speaking, anything wrong with that. But again, I think Pat Buchanan is part of the reason it's so hard to have that conversation, because he discredits it by his presence, because he gives people who watch him carefully the sense that he has another agenda that has to do with personal dislike, and that he believes in conspiracies, and that he believes that the Jews are this sinister, secretly organized force trying to affect American politics. And those aren't discussions I think normal people, sober people, should be having.
Yeah, there's a lot of discussions normal, sober people shouldn't be having that we are having right now. I have to say, Pat Buchanan and Tucker Carlson are two of the nicest people. I'm not joking. I mean, I'm not exaggerating here. Of all the people I've met in DC in politics, two of the nicest people I've met, for what that's worth. But as Tucker was saying, having personal friendships and relationships with people doesn't excuse other behavior. So what's interesting about this is that Ben Shapiro, who has a huge audience, as I'm sure you know, has come out against Tucker. Because Tucker went against Israel, has accused Israel of being against Christians, sort of echoing some of what Candace Owens was trying to do. Obviously, Ben Shapiro is an Orthodox Jewish person. Anyway, here's a clip of Ben Shapiro recently.
So to get back to his just asking questions, in this unfalsifiable world.
All right, so he's talking about Tucker. Ben is talking about Tucker and how Tucker always is just asking questions, bringing up these conspiracy theories and kind of casting himself as the only honest man in a world of plutocrats and deep staters.
Right, where you can't trust anything. You can't believe what you see. You can't believe evidence provided because everybody's lying to you. And counter evidence is unnecessary because they hid all of it. This means the only person you can trust is the person who promulgates the reverse of any traditional narrative you've been hearing in America. It's a pure reaction against whatever is the story of the day. Whether it's true, whether it's false is irrelevant. It's just whatever is the story has to be false because I don't like the people who are telling the story. So they're hiding 9/11. And America's evil for Hiroshima. And Alex Jones is just as solid an informational source as anyone else, which is Tucker actually suggested he was prophetic on Joe Rogan's show. All our members of Congress, again, something that Tucker said on the show, every single one, effectively, are subject to blackmail by the intelligence agencies. According to Tucker, you have to believe Tucker. And if you don't, it's probably because you're part of the conspiracy or the cover-up, because you're owned, because you become the establishment, because you're weak and you can be taken over by nefarious forces. The only man of courage in this routine is apparently the truth seeker Tucker, who asks questions but doesn't actually examine the evidence on these particular issues, because why do you need to know things when you can just ask questions? And what's the point of trying to find things out when all the sources are themselves corrupted?
Yeah, Ben makes a brilliant point there, which is we are now at a point where if you believe any normal, conventional, mainstream idea, you are looked at as an idiot. What, you really think Russia invaded Ukraine? Are you crazy? Oh, you think Prince is actually dead? Prince has been alive for 15 years. Anytime if you ever take a conventional mainstream viewpoint, you are seen as like completely naive and stupid. And look, there's no doubt that every once in a while something weird in the world does happen, but it can't be every single thing. And the person, the only person who really knows the truth apparently is Tucker. So this is interesting though in terms of Tucker versus Ben. And Jonah Goldberg had a hypothesis recently. Jonah has a great podcast called The Remnant. And he recently said that he thinks, this is his theory, he thinks that Tucker Carlson, after leaving Fox News, decided to get into the new media, online, new right space. And who is the dominant figure there? Well, it's Ben Shapiro. And so Tucker, according to the theory, viewed Ben as his main competitor. And how do you beat Ben? You get to the right of him. And what is the one issue where in this crazy political environment, Ben could be vulnerable or susceptible to being outflanked? The issue of Israel. And so this is Jonah's theory that Tucker has decided to kind of go the anti-Semitic route in order to take down his main competitor, Ben Shapiro. And if you buy that theory, then it's at least plausible that the reason Ben has finally started, fired Candace Owens and is now kind of aggressively pushing back against Tucker. Although in fairness, he has been pushing back against Tucker here and there for at least 6 months, I would say. But it's plausible that this is a business move from Ben too, to kind of protect his turf. Anyway, I don't want to go into a conspiratorial rabbit hole analyzing what just happened, but I do think it's interesting. And as much as I tend to focus on mainstream ideas that are things like the Trump trial, every once in a while, it's good to talk about these other things that are bubbling up. Maybe someday maybe I'll even watch Steve Bannon's War Room and talk about that. We'll see. All right, there is, I want to leave you with this, okay? So there's a pastor in North Carolina named, I believe it's Lauren Livingston. I've never heard of him before. That's not saying much. I'm not an expert on this sort of thing per se, but apparently, according to my research, he was Steph Curry's pastor. He is very socially conservative, Pentecostal preacher, and he had a viral video recently going after Donald Trump and going after people who want to tell you that if you're a Christian, you have to be uber political and you have to vote for Trump. So it's like a 3-minute long video. I'm not going to play the whole thing. I broke it into two sections. If you're interested, you could just search for it on Twitter.
When you don't read and pray, you say, wow, there's a Bible out now that includes the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Isn't that wonderful? No, it's disgusting. It's blasphemous. It's a ploy. Are you kidding me? Some of you are so encouraged by that. You do not know what the Word of God says. I'm going to rear back and tell you something. This is not my home. This world is not my home. I've been sent out just like the 70 were sent out. You've been put here and sent out just like the 70 were sent out. We've been put here as strangers and pilgrims, and we are passing through. I am just walking through. I'm just renting an apartment for a little while in this strange and foreign land. No, sir. My real citizenship is in heaven, from which we look for the Lord Jesus.
Preach it. Preach it. I love that. Look, if you're a secular liberal humanist, you won't like much of what this preacher has to say other than this. But it really helps. This is not a cosmopolitan elite guy. This is a Southern Pentecostal, I don't want to say fire and brimstone, but he is bringing it. And thank God, where have these guys been? I have seen so many Christian pastors get caught up in, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but they do, right? They want to be uber political. There is a higher calling, and even though I do believe that it's perfectly fine for Christians to be involved in civics and democracy, and it can be a noble calling, it's not the ultimate calling. And sadly, too many people are making politics into their religion, and they are worshiping. They are just like happened 2,000 years ago. Instead of looking to a spiritual savior, they are looking for an earthly king. In this case, Orange Julius. So preach it. Thank you, Pastor Lauren Livingston, for calling that out. That's it for today. Hope I didn't bore you. Hope it wasn't too weird. We'll be back with probably a normal political interview very shortly. But thank you. Don't forget, if you are watching this on YouTube, subscribe to the audio podcast. Matt Lewis Can't Lose. It's our new feed. And if you are listening, go to youtube.com/Matt Lewis and subscribe there, rate and review, like, all that good stuff. And we'll see you back here soon.